This past week, I was at a Zoom conference for my professional organization, the American Conference of Cantors. And on Tuesday afternoon, I had just finished participating in a gorgeous tefillah led by two of my lovely colleagues. It was time for our president, Cantor Claire Franco, to lead us in the Mourner's Kaddish. As is usual during ACC convention, Cantor Franco and others eulogized some of our organization's members who had died in the past year. And then Cantor Franco recited some moving words and led us in a prayer for those who had died or were still missing in Surfside. At this point, my eyes turned toward the chat, which was blowing up with comments. Most were sending their love to our colleagues in Miami and those who were missing friends and family in the collapse. And then there were a few that stood out. This didn't have to happen. This is something that should only happen in a third world country and could have been prevented. Outdated terminology notwithstanding, this did not feel like the right moment for some of these comments. I wanted to pray, not speculate what went wrong. If those comments, which took me out of a moment of prayer, seem a little bit inappropriate for the moment, the comments that I have been reading on the internet have been even worse. I have online subscriptions to several nationally circulating newspapers, including the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I've been closely following the different stories surrounding the Condo collapse in an effort to understand this senseless tragedy. I know that common wisdom says not to read the comments, though my curiosity has sometimes gotten the better of me. But really, I regret reading the comments. For every well-researched news article, you'll see hundreds, sometimes even thousands of online comments by armchair architects and engineers thinking they knew what went wrong. The residents should sue the owners. The owners of the condo are the owners. They can't sue themselves. If they knew there was damage, why didn't they just repair the building sooner? There was nothing in any report that said the building was in imminent danger of collapsing, and repairs are expensive. There has to have been foul play. Meanwhile, behind the noise, there are so many people whose lives have been forever changed by the condo collapse, and they are hurting. According to the latest reports, 18 people have died and 145 are still missing. People are missing their friends and family and neighbors. Those who survived can never go home again. Why are so many people so zealous about getting revenge from an unknown entity when we could be focusing on helping those who have been devastated by the collapse? This week's Torah portion, Parshat Pinchas, begins with the following blessing for a man named Pinchas. Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying among them his passion for me, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my passion. Say therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship. It shall be for him and his descendants after him a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for his God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. Huh? Who is Pinchas? And what did he do to deserve such a robust, long-lasting blessing from God? So Pinchas is Aaron's grandson, which means he is also Moses' great nephew. Aaron and his descendants already had claim to the priesthood, and this passage makes sure that all of Pinchas' descendants will also be priests. And what did he do that was so great? At the end of last week's Torah portion, the Israelites sinned, and by sinned I mean have relations with, the Midianites. So God brought a plague down on the Israelites. Pinchas caught an Israelite man named Zimri, son of Salu, with a Midianite woman named Cosbi, daughter of Tsur, and stabbed them both with a spear, killing them. The plague then stopped. You might have a lot of questions about this passage, as do I. So I'm going to try and address some of them. First, can anyone name some well-known Midianites from the Torah?
Jethro.
Yes, Sheldon, who is Jethro? Moses, excellent. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And who else? So if Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite, then Zipporah, yes, Moses' wife. Thank you, Sheldon. So basically, so we have Moses' father, as Sheldon said, you have Moses' father-in-law, who's Jethro, the Midianite priest. So he's like really Midianite. And then you have his daughter, Zipporah, who is Moses' wife. And that means that the Midianites are family. So why here is it considered sinning to go off and have relationships or relations with the same group of people who are so important to Moses? There are commentaries that suggest that having relations with the Midianites could cause the Israelites to start worshiping other gods. And we know that's not true because of Moses. So I'm going to discount these commentaries for our purposes. And actually, there's absolutely nothing in the Torah up until this point that states that intermarriage was not allowed. On the contrary, so many of our ancestors married people who were not Israelites, even, as we have seen, Moses. So if we look more closely at the text, the sinning here had to do with this particular group of Midianites' particular military alliances. There's textual evidence that these Midianites had an alliance with the Moabites. And in the last Torah portion, their king, the Moabite king, tried to curse the Israelites in order to win in battle. So therefore, by sinning with the Midianites, the Israelites were literally sleeping with the enemy. Still, even so, it can't be good that Pinchas stabbed Zimri and Cosby, right? Twice, our Torah commands us not to commit murder. And isn't stabbing people considered murder? Well, maybe not in this case, say the commentators. For instance, 19th century German rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says, Pinchas acted meritoriously only because he punished the transgression in flagranto, in the act. Had he done it afterwards, it would have been considered murder. So yeah, it may not have been murder, but I look at it as vigilante justice. And most ethical systems of justice have laws against vigilantism. These same justice systems usually also present a single person, even one with power, like Pinchas, who is from, or usually prevent a single person, even one with power, like Pinchas, who's from a priestly family, to be the judge, jury, and executioner all in one. And in fact, many commentators would call what Pinchas did zealotry. According to contemporary commentator Nehama Leibowitz, in his zeal for God, he slew a man on the spur of the moment without trial or offering previous warning, without legal testimony being heard, and in defiance of all the procedures of judicial examination prescribed by the Torah, which in practice render a conviction well nigh impossible. His deed of summary justice, taking the law into his own hands, constituted a dangerous precedent from the social, moral, and educational angle. Some very traditional commentaries, like the Jerusalem Talmud, state that Moses and the elders of Israel agreed that Pinchas went too far. The Jerusalem Talmud, among others, even says that these elders wanted to excommunicate him, and yet God gave Pinchas a blessing. In order to understand why Pinchas was not punished for his deed, but rather rewarded, I turn to the language of our legal system. If someone commits a crime, even something as heinous as murder, they can pursue what's called an affirmative defense. And we have some lawyers here, so you can totally correct me if I'm wrong. So in other words, they committed the crime, but there's a reason that they should not be punished. So one example of an affirmative defense is extreme emotional disturbance. And that's where the person was not in their right mind while committing the crime. Another example of an affirmative defense is that the person was defending themselves or someone else. And so if one were to put Pinchas on trial, he could theoretically use either one of those defenses. He was disturbed because the Israelites were sinning with the enemy, and he was trying to save the Israelites from a plague. Indeed, the same commentaries that suggest that Moses and the elders of Israel wanted to excommunicate Pinchas explain that God gave him a blessing because he had the purest of motives, and that's a direct quote from Rabbi Kook. And also his deed was animated by a genuine, unadulterated spirit of zeal to advance the glory of God. And that's from Rabbi Baruch Epstein. These commentaries state that God gave Pinchas a blessing in order to inspire Moses not to excommunicate him. Still, Pinchas missed the bigger picture. In his zeal to punish those who he thought had done wrong, he killed 2 people. Meanwhile, members of the Israelite community were sinning, and they probably needed help to stop sinning. That did not involve killing them. And the Israelites were reeling from a plague. This reminds me of all those comments I was reading on the Surfside condo collapse. People have been quick to blame and point fingers. And I do feel empathy for those making those comments. Grief is a mystifying entity. People are just looking for an outlet. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These stages are not linear. Sometimes they happen out of order, and sometimes they happen all at once. Sometimes people jump back and forth between stages. Rather than a single straight line, grief looks like a jumbled mess of lines all squished up into a ball. The people yelling at strangers on the internet about how they should sue or how they should have known this would happen are probably experiencing the denial and anger stages of grief. They're lashing out and they need someone to blame because they just don't understand how something like this could happen. On the other hand, we need to look at the bigger picture. So much destruction has been left in the wake of the condo collapse. First responders continue to look for missing people. Survivors and loved ones have lost their friends and family forever. People who were not in the building or who were in a part of the building that didn't collapse can never go home again. Residents of the sister building are unsure of whether they should even stay in their homes. Some of our very own TBS community members have friends and family in Champlain Towers South who are missing or who have been declared dead. Neighbors in the surrounding community are breathing in smoke from the fires caused by the building collapse. They need help. In this situation, we may be tempted to be like Pinchas and rush to judgment, but we need to try not to be, even though we have seen here that God will have our backs even if we do. There were likely a variety of factors that led to the condo collapse, and the experts are working on figuring it out, and we may not know what these reasons are for weeks, months, or even years. It does us no good as individuals to speculate and point fingers. We don't want to be stabbing our own proverbial Zimri and Cosby when it may not have been their fault. Instead, we should take our shock and our grief and use them as an impetus to be there for those who are affected by the tragedy. If you would like to provide tangible help, the Greater Miami Jewish Federation has stepped up to be one of the leading providers of relief funds. You can donate to their relief efforts at jewishmiami.org. And if you are on the TBS email list, you will be receiving a direct link. We have no way of knowing that the condo would collapse, but this is where we are. Instead of being armchair architects and engineers, let us recognize where we are and be there for those in need. Shabbat Shalom.